Hey there, and welcome to the 4th installment of the New Player's Guide to Final Fantasy XIV. This video is where we are going to explain of what all of these stats mean in your character sheet. This video is going to demystify what each of these can do for you, but at a level that a newer player or a returning player can pick up quickly. The in-depth theory crafting and exact equations are, however, being left to future collaboration series that I'm going to be doing in the next few weeks or so. If you find this content helpful and want to help support me and my channel, please consider smashing that like button and annihilating that subscribe button. I really don't know what I should say there. But anyhow, let's get right into it. So opening up your character screen, you can see that there's going to be a few different columns here. And specifically, you're going to see attributes, offensive properties, defensive properties, physical properties, mental properties, gear, and role. And my goal for this video is to explain each of these sections in pretty good depth. First off, I want to make the distinction between what we call primary stats and secondary stats. So primary stats actually is another way of saying attributes, and so these are going to involve things like strength, dexterity, vitality, intelligence, and mind. Ultimately, when it comes down to factoring how much damage you do or how much healing you're going to output, these are going to be by far the heaviest lifters. Next up is secondary stats that I am going to actually be highlighting on the screen right now. These involve things like critical hit, determination, direct hit rate, skill speed, spell speed, tenacity, and piety. Note that these are going to be the primary and secondary stats that you actually see on pieces of gear. Take for instance my bow right now called Brilliance. You can see in the bonuses section of this that you have dexterity, vitality, critical hit, and determination. Generally speaking, for gear in this game, you're going to usually see a combination of two primary stats, such as dexterity and vitality, and then two secondary stats, such as critical hit and determination that you see here. One thing that should be said following the gear video is that each particular job in this game has a specific weapon type tied to it. So all bows are going to generally have as primary stats dexterity and vitality. All of the tank weapons are going to have strength plus vitality. The only real deviation that you get here is mostly with your secondary stats, such as on this particular weapon, you can see that it has critical hit and determination as its secondary stats. Generally speaking, the primary stats will stay the same across weapon types, and so secondary stats are very often what you're going to see people theory craft around, and what you're going to see a lot of the more upper tier raiders do a lot of simulations and checking out what these stats can actually do for them. As well as these are going to be those traits that can mostly define how you want to play your character, such as if you want to play a quicker character, you're going to want to be focusing more on skill speed or spell speed, depending if you are a Disciple of War or a Disciple of Magic class. And likewise, you can see through materia that you can slot in secondary stats. You used to be able to slot in primary stats, so those attributes like strength, vitality, dexterity, mind, and intelligence. However, you are no longer really able to gain those benefits anymore, and so you're going to be slotting in only secondary stats. And so that's going to include things like critical hit, determination, direct hit rate, spell speed, skill speed, tenacity, and piety. Immediately off of this, most people are probably like, okay, you have not highlighted a few of these other sections. And so I'm going to highlight them right now. So defense, magic defense, attack power, attack magic potency, and healing magic potency, and average item level aren't necessarily something that you're going to be super fixated on when it comes to actually determining what stats you're using. Ultimately, attack magic potency, healing magic potency, and attack power are going to mostly be used when it comes to damage calculations, but they aren't actually stats that you can actually get on pieces of gear. Instead, still continuing to look at this Brilliance bow, you can look at it adding physical damage. Then you can look at dexterity, and then you can take in a combination of determination and a whole bunch of skill factors to get your final attack power stat here. So this is definitely a calculated equation, but it isn't one of your primary stats. Likewise, armor pieces by default have a set amount of defense and magic defense to them that just determines how much damage you take from either physical or magical damage attacks. But those stats aren't something that you really see most people actually looking into and seeing like, oh, I'd better choose this piece of gear because it offers more defense. When it comes to gear and stats in Final Fantasy XIV, defense and magic defense isn't usually something that you see people optimize anymore. It's kind of gone the same way as elemental resistances. Those are not really a thing anymore. I guess I now covered those stats. Elemental resistances aren't a thing anymore. But before I get into what all of these stats specifically do, I should say that your primary attributes, your primary stat is what most people call it, is going to be by far the most important numbers that we're going to be talking about here. So things like strength, dexterity, intelligence, mind, and vitality, those are going to be your biggest, most important numbers. All of those other secondary stats you can think about before as like the sprinkles on the cake. Is kind of like the metaphor I used in my last video, where weapon damage is going to be the actual physical cake itself. Then your primary stats are like the whipped cream and like the icing all around the cake. And then you sprinkle on top of that cake like cherries and sprinkles and kind of stuff, and that's what the secondary stats really are. Your actual core of your cake and the most important bits come from weapon damage and then from primary stats. Secondary stats are by far less impactful. They're still impactful and still will make a huge difference, but they aren't going to absolutely make or break your character. So doing a quick run through of the attributes, we have strength. And so strength is going to be the stat that's going to increase the damage dealt by physical. So this is going to include things like monk, dragoon, all of the tanks. Dexterity, on the other hand, is going to be a special stat that does impact the melee class called Ninja, and specifically Ninja, and then all ranged DPS. So that includes things like the Bard, the Dancer, the Machinist. And why Ninja's there is a good question, but it makes it convenient if you want to flex into a melee role as a ranged DPS character, so I like that. Next up, we have Vitality. And so Vitality is going to be a stat that you're going to see across every single job type in this game. Vitality really determines how much health you have, and so this is going to definitely be a stat that you're going to see tanks have more of. But generally speaking, as I said before, the primary stats aren't really something that you can slot in anymore, and so it's really kind of something that you just look at, and tanks just have more, and you hope that you have more vitality, but at the end of the day, item level, as said in the last video, is going to be the most important thing of determining this. Next up, we have intelligence, and so this is going to impact the damage dealt specifically by the caster classes, and so this is going to impact things like the black mage, the red mage, and the summoner. Next up, we have mind, and so mind works differently, because you might be initially drawn to think, hey, the healers should be doing damage, right? So they're going to be scaling off of intelligence to do damage, right? And if you came across older guides from like A Realm Reborn like 2.0, we had something called cleric stance, which a long history of I think would actually be a really cool video topic on, because I like doing stance dancing a bit. I'm gonna get cancelled for saying that, but basically mind is going to deal, or how to say it, mind is going to be what determines how much healing you do as well as how much damage you do as a healer. And so we don't need to worry about intelligence stat on healers. Specifically, it's going to be mind. And likewise, through that rundown, you probably noticed that each of the roles basically had two stats: vitality, and then whatever their specific role had. Such as healers were vitality, mind, ranged DPS and ninja were vitality and dexterity. Melee DPS and tanks were vitality and strength, and casters were vitality and intelligence. And so that's kind of how it really breaks down in terms of stats on that. So now let's talk specifically about these secondary stats. So critical hit is an interesting stat that has a few different properties to it. And so I am going to make extremely lots of references to something called actmorning.com and their brilliant tables done. And so we're going to be definitely looking at a lot of these screenshots here. So the first thing with critical hit is that you need to realize that critical hit impacts two different modifiers. Critical hit does not just increase the rate, and it doesn't just impact the damage bonus. When you stack critical hit, it's going to go up in the critical hit rate of how often you crit, as well as the damage bonus. And so technically, if you really wanted to look at crit, which is coming up in a future video, you would really show it as being 3 different lines. One being your total expected damage increase, your rate of how much you're going to crit, and your damage bonus. And so if you stack 2000 critical hit stat, then you're going to have a rate of 14.8% and a damage bonus of almost 50%. And likewise, this is going to add up to an expected damage modifier of 1.07. And so what that really translates to is you're going to be doing 7% more damage. Likewise, if you look up 3000 critical hit stat, you can see that the rate is even higher now, and that it's at just about 21%, and that the damage bonus is at just about 56%. And that your expected damage is now modified and increased by 11, almost 12%. But what if you hit 4000 critical hit stat, which is definitely obtainable for the record? This is not a number that is impossible to get. Well, then you're looking at a rate of about 27%, and then a damage bonus of about 62%, which is going to upgrade your damage by roughly 17%, which is pretty big. And so this critical hit stat is not just a flat damage scalar, it's going to be rate and damage bonus, and then it's going to explode at higher values where you're seeing massive rates and massive damage bonuses at once. Next up is determination. And so determination can best be thought of as a flat damage multiplier. It's not going to increase or give you like critical hits or any other modifier. It's not going to make you attack faster. It's just going to add a little bit of a modifier onto your base damage. So every single damage you do is going to have this added damage. And so let's look at some of the stats. So with 1000 determination stat, you get a damage multiplier of 1.026. And so this is going to translate to roughly 3%. I'm just rounding up for the record if people noticed. I know that's 2.6%, but I'm rounding up to 3. So now if we look at 2000 determination stat, that adds a damage multiplier of 1.065, or 6.5% increase in damage with 2000. And then if we look at 3000 determination stat, we can see that the damage multiplier is 1.104. Oh my gosh. This is weird to say these numbers like this, but basically it is going to be a 10.4% increase with 3000 determination. And likewise, if we're looking at 4000 determination stat, we're looking at a 1.144 or 14.4% increase for this stat, or just all of your damage coming out. And so this is definitely significant. Likewise, I know that some people are going to go back into this video and be like, okay, why does 4000 crit give a little bit more than 4000 determination? Trust me, I can't wait until I do my collaboration series. I am looking so forward to that. But trust me, we have a lot of explanations coming your way, but for now, I'm just trying to explain what these stats actually do. But yeah, a really good in-depth explanation of that and how to interpret that is coming up real soon. Please look forward to it. So direct hit is probably the way I want to introduce it is kind of like the close relative to critical hit rate. So direct hit, unlike crit though, is not going to have its damage multiplier scale up with more direct hit. If you ever hit a direct hit on a target, it will add 25% more damage to that target, no matter how much direct hit you have. So whether you have 1000, 2000, 3000, 4000 direct hit rate, you're only going to see the rate of direct hit go up. You're not going to see the damage done go up. So it's always going to be an additional 25% damage if you direct hit. So now with that being said, let's look up some of the intervals. So looking at 1000 direct hit stat, that's going to give you a rate of 10.3%. And so that's going to add a expected damage multiplier of 1.025, or also known as 2.6% roughly. Now if we look at 2000, you're going to see that it is going to go up to a rate of 27%. So that's a significant boost. And then the expected damage is going to be 1.0675, also known as roughly 7% increase. Now if we look at a 3000 direct hit stat, we can see that the rate jumps up even higher to 43.6%, and that the expected damage output is going to be raised by roughly 11%. And so that's a huge jump in rate. But always keep in mind, direct hit rate is going to only add 25% more damage each time it triggers. So unlike crit, it's only going to be 25%. And then at 4000 direct hit stat, we can see that the rate goes to a staggering 60.3%, and that the expected damage multiplier is going to be roughly 15%. And so now with critical hit, direct hit rate, and determination out of the way, I should say that these are usually grouped together as being the offensive stats that you stack usually. And usually when we're referring to these stats are usually what you're going to see most players at endgame stack a real whole lot of. Because when you see those damage percentages, the damage equation, it actually multiplies all of these together. And so this becomes a very powerful multiplicative effect when you're stacking a lot of determination, a lot of critical hit, and a lot of direct hit rate. So after this, we get into skill speed, spell speed, tenacity, and piety. And these stats are more referred to as being kind of like comfort level stats. It's really weird to try and explain it, but I'm going to try and explain it as like when you are looking at playing a particular class, each one of them is going to have a set rotation to it. That rotation is going to be impacted by a whole variety of factors, like how many global cooldowns do you want to fit in a certain period of time, what kind of buffs do you have on yourself, and trying to just maximize how much total damage you can do. And this is going to be extremely specific to the particular job that you're playing. Like a paladin is going to have a vastly different demand on it than a machinist in terms of these stats. And so that's probably the best way that I can explain it without getting into too much nitty-gritty details. But definitely each of these is more a tailor fit to what you personally want to do as well. Such as with Samurai, you can see that there are definitely a bunch of different best in slot suggestions for their stat breakdowns, and some of them have very, very fast skill speed requirements where they go all the way down to like a 2.0 second global cooldown, and they're weaving in off their global cooldowns really quick. It's really fun to play, but again, this all does come down more to preference with these stats. And so skill speed and spell speed is immediately what we're going to get into. And so with this skill speed and spell speed, they really follow the same kind of formula. And so you're going to notice that Disciple of Magic and Disciple of War, really the only difference is the materia is two different type of materia and two different stats, but for all intents and purposes, whether you're stacking skill speed or spell speed, it is really the same thing at the end of the day. And so when I'm pulling up this table, it's going to be really weird for a lot of people because they're going to be like, okay, what's the damage multiplier? And that's going to be something that we're going to be trying to dive into some of the more in-depth theory crafting videos, because it is not as clear-cut of a damage increase as something else. And it is very, very job specific. Like for me, when I'm playing my machinist, I'm actually trying to minimize how much skill and spell speed I have. So again, really custom tailored, but people are probably bored of me saying that, so I'm going to move on. So in terms of 1000 skill or spell speed, you're going to be looking at your global cooldown being reduced down from 2.5 to 2.44 seconds. And again, if you want more details on this, I have a super specific video all to do with the global cooldown in my core mechanics guide, and please check that out. That's going to be in the description below, so if you're more interested in the depths of this, please check that out. So now let's look at 2000 skill speed. And with 2000, we can see that it goes down from 2.5 second global cooldown timer to a 2.34. And so that's going to actually be quite a big difference when it's all added together. And then after that, when we're looking at 3000, we're looking at the 2.5 second global cooldown timer going down to 2.24 seconds. And then likewise, at the end at 4000, we are going to be looking at our 2.5 second global cooldown timer going all the way down to 2.14 seconds. And while that might still seem a little bit slow to some people, because I know that that number seems a lot, check out my global cooldown video. Trust me, that's going to be really fast. In fact, I know some players that came from World of Warcraft being like, I hate the global cooldown timer, this is even worse. But trust me, when you stack in off global cooldowns and then you stack up buffs like the ninja's buff or like the samurai's attack speed buff or monk's, trust me, it gets fast. So now let's talk about tenacity, because tenacity is probably one of the most misunderstood stats in the entire game. Is that an understatement to say? I don't think it's an understatement to say. So tenacity can best be thought of as both additional mitigation, so taking less damage from all attacks, as well as a damage multiplier. So we are looking at damage multiplication like determination, just a flat increase of damage, as well as less damage taken. And so it's this weird blend of determination and additional mitigation. Of course, if it was the same value or more than determination, determination would be irrelevant. So what you're doing when you're stacking tenacity is you are truly trading in some of your offensive property for more defensive properties. But just saying that without actual numbers being shown is pretty abstract. So let's pull up 1000 tenacity stat. And so this is going to be a damage multiplier of 1.018 or 1.8%, roughly 2%. And then in terms of mitigation, we're actually seeing the number go down from 1 and into decimal values. And so what this actually means by itself is that we're looking at a mitigation of 1.8% of mitigation as well. And so what we're looking at with 2000 is a damage multiplier of 4.9%, roughly 5%. And then the mitigation is going to be a mitigation of 4.9%. And so likewise, as you can tell, it's just going to be 4.9% gained and 4.9% mitigated. Now at 3000, we are looking at 1.079 or 8% damage gained, and then roughly 8% mitigation. And then lastly, when we're looking at 4000, we're looking at a damage multiplier of roughly 11% and a mitigation of roughly 11%. And so one thing is that it's really a lot more tricky to compare what you're actually gaining from stats than just looking at the raw numbers, because there is a multiplicative effect in the actual equation. But if you were flat out comparing 4000 determination is going to be giving you roughly 14.4% more damage. And with this, we're getting roughly 11% more damage. And so it's a little bit more than just 3% because of the multiplicative effect, but just putting it out there that it's like, if you are getting a lot of tenacity in your gear, it is not actually the end of the world. It might not be the best if you're trying to absolutely optimize all damage, but on the other hand, mitigation of 10% is definitely something I think that a lot more people should potentially be considering. Even after I saw this, when I was looking at things like just how much damage is being pumped out during some of the ultimate fights, I was like, maybe tenacity is an option. And I think that a few other players will agree that tenacity actually isn't that bad of a stat. But I digress. We need to start to talk about piety next. And so piety is probably one of the stats that is the most to do with your particular level of comfort and the particular level of comfort you have with people in your group. So for piety, this is going to increase how much MP you get. And so MP is just going to be the resource that you use to actually cast spells. All classes are capped at 10,000 MP total. But you know what? Some of the spells in the game cost extremely large amounts of MP. Take, for example, Astrologian's Aspected Helios. That's going to cost you 1,000 MP, so that's 10% of your bar for just one AoE heal, which I realize that's to prevent spamming AoE over and over again. But regardless, when you're in what we call a party out of group or with people that you aren't super familiar with who might be messing up mechanics, you're going to need to use a lot more AoE healing, especially if your co-healer isn't using AoE healing. And so spamming AoE heals is not out of the question. And I think that this is why piety is something that really is worth considering. Because it's just like, if you're doing something like an alliance raid, like one of the large 3-party alliance raids, that is a lot of people that could be taking a lot of damage, a lot of revives that you might need to pop off to prevent the alliance from completely wiping to a boss. So with piety, it really does come down mostly to personal preference and what you plan to do. as well as between the healers, a white mage is going to be a lot, and I mean a lot more MP efficient than the Scholar or the Astrologian. Scholar is still relatively MP efficient, but when it comes to AoE healing, they get really screwed too. I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of MP drain on Scholar still. And then when it comes to Astrologian, I think that it's very hard for me, at least I'll speak for myself. When I play Astrologian in endgame content, the amount of MP that is being sucked out of my character at an alarmingly fast rate is alarming in and of itself. I'm just gonna say it. And so I like to stack a lot more piety if I'm looking at going on Astro. So piety is definitely something that is more of a personal set of preferences. And keep in mind, take all of these with a grain of salt, because you are going to see what we call additional MP per tick, and that these additional MP per tick happen about at 3-second intervals. And so this isn't quite on the 2.5-second global cooldown timer, and so ultimately these numbers might seem a little low, but when we're talking about like a 10 or 15 minute fight, if you're talking about like Shiva Savage, it goes to something like 13 minutes or something. It makes a huge difference. So like just pulling up 1,000 piety, that's looking at 30 additional MP per tick every 30 seconds. And so that does seem low, but if you think about how many 3-second intervals in a minute, so that's going to be 20, that's going to be 30 times 20, which means that every minute you're getting 600 more MP. Or over a course of a 10-minute fight, we're just going to extend that to be multiplied by 10, is going to be 600 times 10 is going to be 6,000. And so you're getting a total of 6 more AoEs roughly with 8,000 piety stat. Now if we stack 2,000 piety, we're getting 75 additional MP per tick, which is definitely a significant boost from before. And so this means that you generate 1,500 MP every single minute. So every single minute you get roughly 1.5 more AoE that you can throw out there. And likewise, this is going to go up to 15,000 through a 10-minute fight. And then stacking 3,000 piety is going to give 120 additional MP per tick. And so this means that in 1 minute that you're going to get 20 intervals of this, which is going to be 2,400 MP, meaning that you can cast 2 more AoE heals every minute, or you can cast, 20 over a course of a 10-minute fight. And then finally at 4,000 piety, we can see that we get a total of 166 MP per tick, and so that is going to be a total of 3,320 every minute. And so that's going to be a total of 3 more AoE casts. And if I'm being super honest, when you're stacking this much piety, it is totally overkill. I myself have never reached piety stat this high, but definitely it is definitely doable. It's something that I have definitely seen people do, but it's a lot. Anyhow, that does it for this video on stats and stat breakdowns and what they all mean. And so as a quick recap, we have our primary attributes that are going to be the main drivers of our statistic output in this game. And these include strength, dexterity, vitality, intelligence, and mind. Most jobs are going to only have a combination of vitality, and then one of these other stats, such as healers will be vitality and mind, tanks will be strength and vitality. We have then the properties of secondary stats, which include critical hit, determination, direct hit, tenacity, piety, skill speed, and spell speed. The combination of your primary and secondary attributes make up the total statistics of your character. Well, I want to thank everyone so much for joining me for this video, and I hope that you learned a lot. Do you have any questions or concerns or things that you want to see covered in a new player guide? Please let me know in the comment section down below. I will be reading them, and I am super excited to see what everyone has to say. And as always, any likes and subscribes are incredibly appreciated, especially as a newer content creator. Every single like and subscribe truly goes such a long way to helping me. Anyhow, that is all for this video, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Thank you so much and have a fantastic day.